think it's recording now. We are recording. Awesome. Okay. So here we go. So another official welcome to our Bat Chat program. We're very excited to be talking about bats the week of Halloween. It's also International Bat Week, which is a really fun way of celebrating these amazing flying mammals. So before we get started talking about bats, Gabby, do you want to tell folks about our management areas in the state? What's a management area and where can you go to find one? Absolutely. So at the Division of Fish and Wildlife, we help manage habitat all throughout the state. So you can see in that map over there on the left side of the screen, that's Rhode Island, and those big green blobs, those are our management areas. So those are places that are protected for wildlife, and it has all of the resources that wildlife needs. So it has food, water, shelter, and space. And in those areas, people can't build houses, they can't put roads there. So it's really a great place for wildlife, and it is preserved for generations. So that means no one will ever be able to build there. No one will ever be able to put a road there. But you can hike there if you want to. So if you want to check out some of our management areas, they're really beautiful. And all that habitat that's perfect for wildlife is also really interesting to see. So you can see we've got wetlands there, we've got woodlands. If you do want to hike there this time of year though, just make sure you have your fluorescent orange on because it is hunting season. So just like we mentioned in that video, if you guys got to watch it, hunters actually help fund the Division of Fish and Wildlife's work. So they help fund our projects, and they help us to buy more land to protect for wildlife. So if you do want to go hiking, right now you have to wear 200 square inches of orange from beginning of September all the way till the end of May. And then just in December, you have to wear 500 square inches. So that is both a hat and a vest. So just make sure you wear that, but you're welcome to come out to either the Great Swamp, Arcadia, Big River, Simmons Mill. We've got them all over the state, so we encourage you to go ahead and check them out. Yeah, so Gabby, do you want to talk, do we have a link that we can toss in the chat? Yeah, and I'll put the link in the chat right now. Awesome. We have a really cool interactive map that you can see where the trails are in the management areas and find one that's closest to you. Okay, so I have this blank screen here. So let's start talking about bats. So I want to ask everybody, how do people feel about bats? And this could be either how you personally feel about bats or how, you know, people as a whole feel about bats or society or what we've heard about bats. So we can either shout those answers out. You can put them in the chat if you'd like. How do we feel about bats? So let's to the chat. Bats are my favorite animal. They're my favorite mammal. Ooh, okay. So we can see why you guys came tonight. I love them. Okay. I love bats. I've never seen any in Rhode Island. Bats are so cool. They're important.
Can I say why I love bats?
Absolutely.
It's because there's a free bat I love. I named one myself at Stone Zoo, and I named one of them Bonnie, and her mom and dad. Her dad's name is Bubba, and her mom's name's Tubba.
Bubba and Tubba the bats. I love it.
And Bonnie.
And Bonnie. Right. So bats, we're seeing like, I'm seeing a lot of positive things in the chat, like they're adorable, they need protection. I love that they eat bugs. I feel bad for them right now with the pandemic. They're the best bug control. So we have a lot of positive feelings about bats here in this group, which I probably expected because you guys came to a chat about bats. So I would think that you probably are interested in them or you're excited to learn about them. But sometimes people don't feel so positive about bats. Sometimes people feel a little creeped out, maybe a little nervous. So I collected some images from Google of how people might feel about bats. So if you go way back into like some old cartoons, you have this, like, you know, the idea that bats are mice with wings, like, ew, they're gross. They're just rats or mice with wings. That's actually not true. So bats are, I like to say bats are bats and rats are rats. So bats are in their own order of mammals, Chiroptera, and then mice and rats are in a completely different order of mammals called Rodentia. So we have bats and rodents in totally different groups of mammals. So they're both mammals, right? So that means that they're somewhat related. They're distantly related, but bats are completely different from mice. They're totally different. And we'll talk about some of their cool adaptations that make them different from mice in a little bit. A lot of people think, oh, bats are going to fly into your hair. They're really scary. It took me a really long time to find this photo, by the way. It's like really badly photoshopped to show that bats are flying into your hair. A lot of people have that misconception about bats. And if you're like me, I have bats in my backyard. I live in the suburbs, but I have some farmland near me, and the bats are in my backyard in the summer. And I've seen them swoop really low. Like I'm standing in the back with my dog. I'm like, wow, that bat flew really far, far down and flew over my head. It's not because that bat's trying to get into my hair. It's because that bat is looking for bugs. And most likely there are bugs that are starting to swarm towards me because I might be a tasty snack for a mosquito. So bats are just trying to find a snack when they're swooping around. They're not trying to snack on your hair. Another misconception is that bats are blind. So we have a little bat here at the eye doctor. He's getting his eye exam. So bats are not blind. They have eyes, they can see, and their vision is about the same as ours is. So you can think, when you go outside at night, you can see, but your night vision is probably not like, if you have night vision goggles on, you're going to be able to see much better. But when I go out at night, I can see, but I'm not, seeing everything perfectly. And that's similar with bats, right? So they use a really special tool, adaptation, called echolocation. And echolocation is when the bat squeaks and makes this high-pitched squeak or a chirp that's so high-pitched that we can't even hear it with our ears. And that chirp bounces off of objects, and then that sound bounces back to the bat, and they can tell exactly how far away that object is, where it is in relation to them. And that helps them not only avoid flying into things at night, but also to find their favorite snack, bugs. And so they're not blind, they can see. A lot of people, of course, with Halloween on the horizon, a lot of people associate bats with vampires and Dracula, and oh, it's going to suck your blood. So there are some bats that do drink blood, vampire bats. There are only 3 species of vampire bats in the whole world, and they all live in Central America. And when they drink blood from an animal, it's usually a cow or a pig or another sleeping large mammal, and they only take 2 tablespoons of blood. So if you have a tablespoon in your kitchen, measure out 2 tablespoons, and that's all that they're taking from that animal. So that's no different than if you go to the doctor and they take a blood sample to do your blood work to make sure that you're nice and healthy. They're probably taking more blood when they do your blood work, is my guess, than a vampire bat would take. So vampire bats are not really vampires. They're not like that scary as a vampire in a movie. And they're not all bats are going to do that to you. So I throw this guy in. This is another vampire who's not so scary, the Count. Do people think bats are good at counting? I don't know. But bats can, if we were to count the number of insects a bat would eat, you'd get pretty tired. And Gabby's going to do some trivia with you guys in just a second. But I put the count in here because the count is holding a clue. So I'll have everybody remember that clue as we go forward. And last but not least, a lot of people think that all bats have rabies. If you see a bat, it must be rabid, it must be dangerous. And while bats can get rabies because they're mammals, so any mammal can get rabies. That's why when we take our dogs and cats to the vet, they get a rabies shot to prevent getting rabies. But so bats can get it, but if you see a bat, that doesn't necessarily mean that it has it. So the Department of Health every year tests bats. Sometimes a bat is trapped in someone's home and it's flying around in the room, and you don't know, maybe you found it at night and everybody was asleep, so you don't know if that bat bit anybody. And that's how you get rabies, is from an animal biting you, in the saliva of that animal getting into the cut. So if you don't know whether or not the bat bit you, then they have to test that bat for rabies. So the Department of Health will test bats every year. They test hundreds of bats because bats get stuck in people's homes. So they might find it in your basement already dead. Sometimes, it's not a live bat. They might just find one in your home. So they'll test them. And over a 10-year period, on average, only 4% of those bats tested positive. So that's a really tiny amount, right? When you're testing that many bats. So they can get it, but the vast majority of bats that you would encounter do not have rabies. Now that doesn't mean that we should go up and cuddle a bat, even though they're super cute and you just want to like hug them. That doesn't mean we should cuddle them, right? They are wild animals. We need to give them their space and give them their distance. And if you have a bat in your home, handling this question always comes up. What do I do if it's in my house? Trying to get the bat out or capturing the bat with a Tupperware, putting a lid on it and punching holes in it so the bat can breathe, and then you would submit that bat to the Department of Health for testing. You should always have thick leather gloves on if you're going to be going anywhere near a bat to do something like that. And obviously, if you need help with that, if you're not comfortable doing that, you can call animal control, environmental police. They'd be able to help you out with that. But for the most part, if you're going outside and you see a bat, probably not rabid. I love Batman, right? So do bats fight crime? I don't know. Bats might not be fighting crime like Batman, but they certainly are helping people in a lot of different ways. We'll talk about why they help people. And somebody said it in the chat, they eat a lot of bugs, so that's very helpful to us as humans. But there's some other ways that bats help us too, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I just had to throw in Batman because I love it. So depending on where you come from in the world, a lot of these bad myths and misconceptions about bats, all these rumors, that seems to be kind of concentrated towards Western culture, European culture, because of Dracula and like horror movies and stuff. But if you go to Asia, bats are actually a symbol of good luck. In China especially, and so you can see these like beautiful artwork, this vase right here with bats on the vase. So it's really cool to see, something that other people might be terrified of or think that's kind of gross are considered beautiful in other parts of the world. So it's all in how you look at it. That's my little lesson there with our bats. And of course, Lego Batman approves. So those are some bat myths, busting bat myths. Okay, Gabby, do you want to take over some bat basics and trivia?
Absolutely. So before I get to the trivia, someone asked in the chat, I'm curious about how to see them. And someone answered, look up at dusk. They swoop around catching mosquitoes. And you're absolutely right. So bats are nocturnal, so they're out in the nighttime. So if you want to see bats, if you go out into a field, that's the best place, and a field near water, especially, because then you know that if there's a wetland there, there's probably a lot of bugs around. So go out into the field, look up at the sky, and if it's a nice bright night with a bright moon, then you should be able to see the bats kind of swooping around, their silhouettes. But they're really hard to tell bats apart. We'll tell you a little bit more about the bats in Rhode Island, but you'll at least be able to see their silhouette. You might not be able to tell what kind of bat it is, but they're still really, really fun to watch. I was just watching them the other night out at my house because there were still a few out. All right, so to bat basics. So just like Mary said, bats are mammals. So they are related to mice, but different than mice. They're in the order Chiroptera, and that in Latin means hand wing. So if you look at that picture on the bottom, you can see a human's hand and then a bat's wing. And when you look at the bones, if you look at where like their thumb is, where their pointer is, where their middle finger is, their bones and their wings are actually the same as the bones that we have in our hands. So you can see their little thumb there up at the top, and then their pointer finger and their middle finger are kind of close together, and then their ring finger and their pinky finger are a little bit farther apart. And that's where they get that name Chiroptera, hand wing, because the bones are very similar. And when they fly, they actually kind of swoop like this, and they can flex those fingers, unlike birds, which just flap. So they have more flexible wings. They're only flying mammals. So looking at bats all around the world, how many species of bats do you think that we have worldwide, in all of the world? How many species of bats? Go ahead and type your answers in the chat. 1,430 plus, 100, a lot. So definitely a good answer. Someone said when I was young, my dad used to throw pebbles up and the bats would swoop. I used to do that too in my cool time. I didn't suggest that because I kind of feel bad for the bats now that I'm kind of taunting them with the rocks. All right.
You're like, is that a big beetle? No, it's just a rock.
I know. I'm like, I feel bad now, but it did work. All right, let's review. So we got 900, 280, 1,000, 150. So the first guess was actually the closest. So we have over 1,300 different species of bats in the world, and that number has been increasing. Like, they're discovering more, they're reclassifying them, because just a few years ago, if you looked it up, there were only about 1,100, and now there are more than 1,300. So a lot of different kinds of bats all around the world. And if you were looking at that map there and you saw the number 122, that's actually how many bat species are within each area. So, you know, you can see where the hot spot of the world is, right over there in South America. So there are a lot of different species of bats over there in the rainforest, in the tropical region, right where that yellow kind of goes across. So tons of different bats all throughout the world, and they all help in different ways, which we'll talk about in just a couple of minutes. But in Rhode Island, how many species of bats do you think we have just in Rhode Island? And there was a hint, if you remember the number that the count was holding.
The chat's going crazy. Just all like, me, 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 me.
Everyone's like, I want to get the answer first. All right. Oh, everyone has a very good memory. So,
good job.
you guys did a really good job paying attention. So we have 8 different species of bats in Rhode Island. And you could tell the count was holding the number 8 if you didn't remember. And so those bats, we have some that are more common, some that we think might pass through. And we will talk a little bit more about how we know what kind of bats are in Rhode Island. So I'll hand it over to Mary now so she can tell you about our Roadie Bats.
All right, let's meet the Roadie Bats. So our 8 species of bats here in the state. Oops, my slide would click. So here are our 8 little guys. So they're all pretty small. I would say like the largest one, the Hoary Bat, is our largest species, and that's like a 12 to 14 inch wingspan. So that's about as big as the bats in our area are going to get. So we have 8 different species that could potentially be here in the state. So some of them are far more common than others, and some are a little rarer. So the most common bat by far that you would see in Rhode Island is the big brown bat. And this little guy is the most common culprit if you found bats in your attic, if you've found bats, you know, in your barn or your garage or behind your shutters. These are the bats that you're probably going to be finding. They really like structures. They're even, you know, in the city in Providence. Somebody told me once that they used to sit on the State House lawn and watch bats fly around the State House lawn. So my guess is they're probably up in maybe in the rotunda or in some of those older buildings around Providence, you know, finding their way into attics and such. So big brown bats are very common here in the state, and they even overwinter here. So we'll talk a little bit about how bats migrate and who's going where after we get through our 8 little guys here. So big brown is the most common. The second most common you're probably going to see is the eastern red, which is personally my favorite bat because they're just so cute. They're a nice like reddish fur. They're very fluffy and fuzzy. The eastern red bat is a little bit different from the big brown bat though, because they don't roost in buildings. They end up by roosting in trees. So they really like hollow tree cavities. They'll wedge their way up underneath like bark that's shredding off of a tree. If you've ever seen like a piece of bark kind of peeling off, that's a perfect spot for a red bat. They'll even hang from the branches and wrap their little wings around themselves so they look kind of like a leaf hanging there. So we have, you know, more structural bats and more tree bats here in the state. Little brown bats look like big brown bats, only they're a little bit smaller. Used to be very common in the state, but we're seeing their numbers starting to shrink here in Rhode Island, and we'll talk about why in just a little bit. Now these other guys that we have here, the Hoary Bat, the silver-haired bat, tricolored, these guys are, you know, we see them, you know, on occasion, fairly frequently, but they're not necessarily as common in the state, but we do get them here. And then these last 2, the northern long-eared and the eastern small-footed. Northern long-eared is a federally threatened species. So this is a species that we're, you know, concerned about across the United States, and it's within its range. So we have had records of northern long-eared bats here in Rhode Island, but we're always on the lookout for them. And eastern small-footed aren't necessarily threatened, but we're within the range for the eastern small-footed, but we don't see them very often. So it's probable that they are here in Rhode Island. So that's why I have my little question marks here. So we're always on the lookout for them, but we really don't have too much data on eastern small-footed here in the state. So some bats, you know, like little browns, big browns, tricolored bats, northern long-eared, these guys like to go north for the winter. So bats, like birds, migrate for the seasons. Now, most birds go south, right, for the winter, but some bats go north. So where these bats are going is they'll migrate north, and even if it's just from Rhode Island to Vermont or upstate New York, they'll be going up to those areas and trying to find caves or other places where they can hibernate throughout the winter. So those places where they go are called Hibernacula. And this is typically a cave that is, so the temperatures are above freezing. It's usually pretty damp in those caves too. So they can, hang out there for the winter. And when they hibernate, they don't truly hibernate, like a bear or a woodchuck. The woodchucks truly hibernate. They're out cold for the winter. You can poke the woodchuck, you can jostle it around, it's not going to wake up. Bats are more like bears in their hibernation, because they when they hibernate, they do wake up a little bit. They could be a little groggy. They're not fully asleep forever and ever. So they'll kind of get up, they'll get a little drink, they'll move around a little bit, and then they'll settle back into sleep. In the fall, they make sure that they eat a lot in the fall, because they fatten up to create lots of fat reserves in their body. So that's what they survive off of in the winter, because all of these bats here on this slide live here in Rhode Island, and they just eat bugs. So in the wintertime, you can imagine how many bugs are flying around, right? So they have to make sure that they eat a lot before they go into their hibernation. So these little guys like to go, so big brown, tricolored, little brown, they like to go north, northern long-eared as well. And that's where they're hibernating, up north. Now, something like a red bat or a hoary bat, they actually fly south for the winter. And when they go south, they might, find their way into a tree, or they might find their way even under the leaves on the ground. Eastern reds have been found kind of hibernating and resting underneath like piles of leaves on the forest floor, which is kind of interesting when you think, oh, you could fly, you could go up into a tree. And so it depends on where they go in the South, because parts of the South, you can find bugs year round, or it stays warm, fairly warm year round, so they can remain active throughout the winter. But any eastern red bats that we have here in Rhode Island, they're going south for the winter and finding either a place to rest or a place to remain active. So they have some different strategies in the way that they survive. And big browns, sometimes we'll have big browns, we have tricolored, we have some little browns that will stay here in Rhode Island. And there's some places, some hibernacula in Rhode Island, where these bats will find their way and be able to overwinter here in the state. So we don't have a lot, the vast majority of bats, those big colonies that they're all like huddled together in a cave, those are further north. So we don't see those numbers here in the winter, but we still have some bats that hibernate here. We have a question here. Are they still active now? So that's a great question. So as, I've got, I don't know about you guys, but every day I'm like swatting little flies around in my house. So there are still some bugs out there. There's moths and stuff. So probably, before like we get a really hard frost, because that's what really kills the mosquitoes as well. We'll see some activity. Then Gabby, you said that you were just watching the bats last week.
Yeah.
So
it's been so warm.
If they're still warm out. But they'll find their way until the winter really sets in. It's a great question.
I just posted in the chat the link to our bat fact sheet. So if you're interested in learning more about Roadie Bats, or you forgot something that we said, then you can always go look at that fact sheet there. And we have a bunch of other fact sheets also that you can look at on our DEM page.
Right. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to hand it back to Gabby to talk about the importance of bats.
Right.
Why are bats important?
Well, why are bats important? We gave it all away. No, but you guys actually, a lot of you already mentioned this in the chat, so you must have already known a little bit about why bats are important. So bats here in Rhode Island are important, and bats all around the world. So here in Rhode Island, like we mentioned a bunch of times, all of our bats just eat bugs, so they're insectivores. So that means that they go fly out, they look for bugs, and when they're eating bugs, they're actually helping with pest control. So they'll eat any kind of night-flying insects, so moths and beetles that would ruin farmers' crops. These bats will go out and eat them, and they've actually saved farmers in the US billions of dollars just by eating up bugs, doing what they would normally do. So they help a ton with pest control. And then we'll talk about how you can kind of invite bats into your garden at the end and have some pest control, some natural pest control from bats. They also, in other parts of the world, they will help pollinate plants. So you can see the adorable bat on the bottom covered in pollen.
We have a comment in the chat. Oh, that pollen covered face.
He's so cute.
Heart.
Little tongue coming out. He's like the cutest thing ever. So they'll go into those cactus flowers and try to get the nectar that's in the center. And when they do that, the pollen gets rubbed all over their faces. They'll move to another flower and they'll help spread that pollen and pollinate plants. And then other parts of the world, they will eat fruit. So someone said, if I throw fruit in the air, fried fruit in the air instead of pebbles, will they come? Not in Rhode Island. I don't know about in other places, maybe. Maybe not fried fruit. But places where they have the big flying foxes, they'll eat fruit and they actually help disperse seeds. So when they eat that fruit, every time you eat, you gotta go out the other end. And so they actually help disperse seeds as they're flying, and they can help plant entire new rainforests. So they help us by providing a lot of food for us by helping with pest control, pollination, and seed dispersal. So if you like agave nectar, then you can have some agave nectar. Thank the bats because they help with that pollination. And a lot of other fruits are saved thanks to bats.
Yeah, I was actually just reading something about agave because I was really interested in this because there's like a lot of rainforest plants, like anything like bananas or avocados, papayas, anything that you enjoy from the tropics. There's like a chance that a bat has had a hand in that. But agave, the agave flower, bats are like one of the sole pollinators of the agave flower. And so I was just watching, interestingly enough, on Netflix, there's a really cool documentary called The Taco Chronicles. If you like tacos, I recommend watching it. But there's a special, there was a special feature in one of the documentaries talking about agave production and how they farm agave in Mexico. And they were showing these, you know, the big agave cactus, and they have to cut the core of the cactus and all the nectar comes out. And I was researching and I said, oh, where are the bats? Where are the bats? So most like commercially produced agave doesn't get to the flowering stage. So they harvest the nectar, and then by that point the plant dies because it hasn't flowered. So there's a big movement among Mexican conservation biologists to save the bats in Mexico that rely on the agave plant. They're working with farmers and working with landowners to plant agave like as hedgerows or leave a portion of their farm untouched and allowing those plants to flower so that they can provide food for the bats. So it's really an interesting way of how human needs and bat needs, like ecosystem needs, can be balanced on a farm, which I was like, oh, that's so fascinating, because you think of like up here, your farm issues are usually like deer eating your corn or something like that. And they're like, oh, we gotta protect the bats. So it was just a really interesting little piece of info. So I encourage everybody to look it up if you're interested in agave.
And someone mentioned flying foxes equals sky puppies. So flying foxes, if you haven't heard of them before, you should definitely Google a picture of flying foxes, because they're adorable. Their faces look like a dog face or a fox face. And they're the largest bat is the golden crown flying fox, and it has like a 6-foot wingspan. So they're massive. but they just eat fruit. That's all that they eat. So you don't have to worry about them like sucking blood or anything scary like that. They just help by eating fruit, and then they disperse the seeds. So they're a huge help. And we also have teeny tiny little bats also in the world. So all different shapes, all different sizes, and they all help in different ways.
Awesome. Okay, so we mentioned before that the little brown bats, the numbers of little brown bats are going down here in Rhode Island, and that is because of a disease called white nose syndrome. So this is a disease that is caused by a fungus, and this fungus grows on the face and the wing membranes of the bat. So all that skin that's stretched out between their fingers, that's the membrane of their wing. What the fungus does is it harms those surfaces on the bat, and it causes them to wake up from hibernation. And they can either wake up too early and then end up by flying out in the middle of the winter and there's nothing to eat, or it's too cold and they end up by either dying of starvation or dying from exposure to the elements, also from being picked off by predators. Even if they don't fly out of the cave and all of that happens to them, they can wake up more frequently during hibernation. So we said before, the bats, they'll kind of like sleep for a little bit, they'll wake up, get a little drink off the side of the cave, and then they'll, it's very damp in the cave, so there's water trickling down. It's the ideal place for a fungus to grow. Think of mold growing in your fridge. It's like cool and kind of humid in your fridge. So that's similar to, a cave. So when the bats wake up, when they have white nose syndrome, they wake up more frequently. So like we said before, they eat a lot in the fall. They get nice and chubby for the winter so that they can survive off of those fat reserves all winter long. But when you wake up and you go back to sleep, and you wake up and you go back to sleep, and you move a little bit, you're using up some of that energy, and that uses up their food store within their body faster than if they had just stayed in their hibernation state the way that they're supposed to. So there's something about this fungus that causes that disruption of their yearly cycle. And this unfortunately has killed, now this is, the statistic is from 2006 to 2012, about 5.5 million bats. And now it's over 6 million, and even over 6 million is probably a real underestimate of how many bats we have lost to this disease. So there's evidence of it starting in upstate New York in a cave in upstate New York, and it's since spread across the country. It's all around the Northeast. We do have it in Rhode Island. It's spread all the way across the East Coast, up and across the northern part of the country, and even all the way to Washington State. So it's really become a huge problem because it's hitting colonies of bats really, really hard. So the reason why we're seeing fewer little brown bats in Rhode Island is because a lot of little brown bats are dying up in the colonies where they're going, up in northern New England, and there are fewer coming back here in the spring. So we're seeing, our colonies that we observe during the summer. During the summer months, we do exit counts. So there's some spots in the state where we know that bats will roost together. So the big brown bat, little brown bats, they like to roost in buildings, and all of the females like to congregate together where they have their pups, their babies. So what we'll do is we'll do a count in like May and count the number of bats, and they come out one at a time, which is really cool. In regular years, we host a bat night where you can come out with Gabby and myself, and we count the bats and we show you how to do it. But the bats come out one at a time and you can count them. And then a little bit later in the season, like 4 to 6 weeks later, we do a second count to try to get a sense of how many pups were born and fledged. So they get to their flight stage from the roost. So you can kind of estimate how many babies were born in that colony. And we're seeing those colonies shrink, over time. And the cool thing about bats is that they're very faithful to their site. So they, if there's a mama bat who is in that roost this year, she's going to go back to that same roost next summer to have her pup. And if her pup is a female, that female pup is going to follow her there as an adult to have her pups. Males are a little different. They kind of form little bachelor pads elsewhere, and there's like a handful of bats together where they're kind of solitary. But those colonial nesting females, they're coming back to the same places each year. So if we count them every year, we can see, okay, well, this number of females has grown. So we've recruited new bats to the population, or it's shrinking. That means that there are fewer bats returning from their hibernaculum. And they go to the same hibernaculum every year as well. So it's good from a science perspective because it gives you an idea of like where the bats are going and how many are coming back or going to and from those places. But it is sad to see fewer bats coming back. And this could have, negative repercussions for the ecosystem because, as we said before, bats eat a lot of insects. They are the providers of insect control here in the Northeast. But there's, fear that this disease will spread further south. There's huge colonies of bats in the desert in the Southwest. Down in Texas, there's huge colonies. There's like a bridge down in Texas that people sit outside in their lawn chairs to watch the thousands of bats come out from underneath this bridge. So this could really affect bats elsewhere and affect those ecosystem services, those good things that they provide in the ecosystem for us as people. So this is something that is fairly new to science. It was only discovered in 2006, which sounds like a long time ago now, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a long time. There's a lot of scientists who are studying this disease. They're trying to figure out if there's something they can spray in the caves to kill the fungus. Is there something that we can, like a vaccine that we can give the bats? Is there a way that we could treat and release the bats? And not all bats die from this. We've seen bats come back to Rhode Island, and Gabby's going to talk about how exactly we see them up close. But we've seen bats that have scars on their wings from the fungus, and they've survived it, and they've fought it off. So there's some bats that are surviving, which is great. So some of them are able to tough it out, and those bats will hopefully survive and reproduce, and hopefully their offspring will be able to fight off that disease. But the problem with bats is that they only have one pup a year, maybe two. So that is tough when your population is going shoo down really fast and you only have one pup a year. So if each bat kind of has one pup to two pups, your increase in your population is going to go up really slowly, but your population decrease is going way faster than your increase. So that is the concern, is that the bats won't be able to pick back up and kind of replenish themselves. So there's a lot of work being done on it right now. There's a really cool interactive map where you can see how the bats, how white nose syndrome has spread in the country. And if you Google white nose syndrome, there's like tons of resources on it to show what people are doing to try to learn more about it. So we don't want to keep it.
We had a question in the chat
too.
So the question was, does it affect all species?
Excellent question. So the bats that are going north are the ones that are being affected by it most heavily. So something like a red bat goes south. They don't roost in caves. They're roosting in trees over the winter. They're not in large groups. So they're not being exposed to it. So we're seeing huge declines in little browns, big browns, and the northern long-eared is suffering really heavily from it. Huge percentage of northern long-eared has gone down because of this. One of the reasons.
Those cave-dwelling bats that all kind of gather together in that environment that is just like perfect for fungus to grow, those are the ones that are being affected. The ones that kind of go off and either overwinter alone or go south and don't hibernate with a bunch of other bats, then those are the ones that aren't being affected quite as much.
So but I don't want to like bring everybody, we're going like all this kind of down.
Now
so
we're going to go to the fun.
Bring it back up. So we're going to talk about some positive stuff and how we're learning more about bats and monitoring our state's bats to make sure that they're doing well. So this is the really fun part about the presentation. This is my favorite stuff.
This is the fun, interesting part. So every year, our bat biologist, Charlie, will go out and he will catch bats. And the way that he does this is he has these two really long poles that you can see there, those silver things on either side on the left picture. And then in between those two silver poles, there's actually a net. And it's so fine and so thin that you can't even see it in that picture. At least I can't see it. I don't know if anyone else can. And that net, the bats, since they only can see just about as well as you and I can at night, they'll fly into the net when they come out at night. And so you can see that right-hand picture, this little bat is caught in the mist net. That's what that net is called. and we're gonna take him out of there. So
we're gonna
picture in this video here, this is actually our volunteer coordinator, Jen. So we used to have,
it's not playing,
doesn't
Gabby.
exist. No. So we used to have people come out and help us miss net, but unfortunately we couldn't even miss net this year because of the coronavirus and the worry that we might actually spread it back to bats here in the US. So we weren't allowed to do any hands-on monitoring of bats. But once the bat gets caught in the net, we're sitting right outside the net, and we can look up and we can either see it silhouetted against the sky if there's a little bat bundle in the net, or we'll go over with our headlamps and check every few minutes. So right away, right when the bat gets caught, we'll see it and then we'll take it out. So Jen in that video, what she's doing, she has gloves on because bats can carry rabies, and she does have her rabies vaccine also. What she's doing is she carefully untangles that bat, and the bats are tiny and they're super delicate. So she has to be really careful getting it out, and she'll untangle it and we'll collect it, and then we'll take some data on it. And that is why we're catching the bats, is to collect all this data. So we're looking at things like what kind of bat it is. So is it a big brown bat? Is it a red bat, a little brown bat? And then we're also measuring things like their wingspan, so their little, or their forearm length on their wing. And so we take that measurement, and then we also will see if it's a male or if it's a female, and we can tell if the female has had a pup if we look really closely at it. And then we can also tell the age by looking, they have these bones, and if there's this tiny little gap in the bone, then we can tell if it hasn't come together yet, then it's going to be a juvenile. And if it has come together, then it's going to be an adult. So we can actually tell the age of the bat, just if it's young or if it's old, but not, how many years old it is. But the way to tell how many years old it is by putting a band on them. So let's see if this video works now.
Sorry, I had a little panic attack there. I was like, what happened to my video?
So funny, it didn't work.
There's always something new. It's just, we're trying our best. This should work. You guys should be able to hear the bat squeaking as Jen is getting it out. Maybe. Let's try it. There we go.
Common species. You can find them just about anywhere. From Warren to West Greenwich, they're just about everywhere. In most rural places and most urban places. This is the one you're most likely to find in Providence or to roost in buildings. Yeah.
There we go. Okay, so that is going to get untangled.
So that was Jen, and then you could hear Charlie talking in the background. I think he was talking about big brown bats. He was saying you can find them just about anywhere in the state. You can find them in cities, and that's true. You can find them just about anywhere. So it's Jen untangling the bat, and then here's a little bit about how we collect that data. So Charlie's taking the bat out of the bisnet, and then we actually, instead of holding the bats in our hand the whole time, we need to get things like weight on them. And so we actually have toilet paper tubes, and we use those as little bat holders. And the bats actually like going in there because it's small and it's dark, and they love squeezing into those small dark places, so it feels nice and safe for them. So the the toilet paper tubes are actually pre-weighed. So it has that weight written right on there, that 6.2. And then we put the bat in there, we put it on the scale, and by subtracting the weight of the toilet paper tube from the total weight, then you get the weight of the bat. And then there's that cute little bat who's smiling for the camera.
We're going, I'm part of an alien abduction, help!
For that.
I think they're positively terrified. And this whole process takes under 5 minutes. So it's very quick.
Fast.
It takes us longer to explain it than it does to get the bats in and out. Okay, so we have a little video of the bat being weighed, which cracks me up because you can see the toilet paper tube wiggling because the bat is wiggling around inside. Let me out. There's a bat being weighed. Okay, Gabby.
So you can actually hear the bat making sound in this one, but when they're feeding and when they're swooping around catching insects, they're using echolocation. So they're actually using different sounds that we can't hear. They're so high pitched that they're above our ability to hear. But right now he's yelling and he's like, "Ah, what are you doing to me? Let me out of here." And then we let him go. But first, before we let them go, we put a
take him out of the
Oh,
tube.
we take him out of the tube.
Oh, I'll look at that. So you can look really closely. You can see his little face poking out of the tube. He's still going, let me out. so once these popped out of the toilet paper tube,
Then we weigh them. Then
Yeah.
we measure them. So that's what I was talking about before, measuring their forearm length, and then looking at the bone to see if it's come together right at that joint. That's right there. And so, like I said, if it hasn't come together yet, then that means it is a younger bat. If it's come together, then it's an older bat. But to tell actually how old the bat is, we can't tell the exact age, but what we do is we put little bands on them, and those bands can help us tell how long the bat has had the band on. So it kind of gives us a guess about how old the bat is. So each one of these bands, they just attach to that forearm of the bat, and it has a unique code on it. And that code helps us tell each individual bat apart. So we can tell if we caught the same bat year after year. So if we catch a bat when it's a juvenile, we know that it was born that year. So then we can tell exactly, just about exactly how old it is. Or if we catch it when it's an adult, we'll know, well, it's at least, if we catch it 3 times, it's at least 3 years old, but it could be even older than that. And we have recaptured a lot of those same bats. Just by looking at the band, we can tell, oh, this is the same bat that we caught last year in this same exact location. Because just like Mary said, a lot of times they'll return to the exact place where they were born. They'll forage in the same areas. So that's how we actually tell the bats apart. We can also tell where the bats go because other biologists in other parts of the US will go into caves and they'll look at those bands and look at the numbers, and they can tell us, oh, this bat that we can see here in a cave in Vermont was actually banded in Rhode Island. That means that that bat flew all the way from Rhode Island to Vermont. So we can tell where the bats are going in the wintertime, and that has happened before. We've had bands reported back from caves in Vermont, so we know where our bats overwinter, and that's how we can tell where they go and why we can tell you that because we've done some research on it. And then once they're banded, we just, we let them go. So you can see this is this little hand. I think that's, that might be Jen's hand, and she's letting the bat.
That's Sarah. That's
Oh,
Sarah.
Sarah's hand. She's letting the bat drop off. It'll drop off her hand and then fly away because they can't really take off from the ground. So they have to be up high, like on a tree or hanging from something, and then they'll swoop down and fly away.
Sometimes they don't want to take off right away, I think, because they're just like, what just happened? So I've seen Charlie like lay them on tree bark and like kind of like hang them up on the tree bark with their little thumbs so they can go at their own leisure. But it's always really cool. It's fascinating to me the amount of data that we can get on a bat just from a little aluminum band. This is really low tech. And technology has caught up, to have like GPS units that you can put on animals of all different sizes. I'm not sure. I think they've just started getting something small enough to put on a bat. And I don't know how long the little thing lasts because it's so tiny that like the battery can't last that long. So I think they're just starting to kind of tap into that technology. But this has given a lot of information over the years before all this fancy technology is catching up. Oh, we have one more little video of a release, and this goes pretty fast, so you gotta like watch it. Don't blink. Oop, there he goes. I can play it again so you guys can. So that's how quick they get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool. And that's just some pictures of our exit counts. So we do a summer bat night where folks get. This is one of our hatchery buildings down in Richmond. The Carolina hatchery, and there's like 200 bats up in this attic. So it's really a fun night. You can see the bats come out one at a time from this little corner right here. So we sit out and we watch the bats. Sometimes there's a heron that flies in. We've actually saw an owl one year land right there because owls will eat bats. So it's a nice little buffet for them as the bats are coming out. We saw an owl swoop down and catch one of the bats. Sad for the bat, but really interesting to watch nature in action. And we do a little contest to see who can get the closest to the official bat count in 5 minutes. And in past years, we've given away a bat house as part of that activity. And Gabby mentioned before that you can tell bats by their calls. So just like you can, if you're a bird watcher, you listen to the bird calls in your yard or in your neighborhood, you can tell which bird is singing based on its song. Well, bats, we can do that, but we can't do it with our ears. We have to use a computer program to be able to do that. So here we have a big brown bat and we have an eastern red bat, and you can see those sonograms of the little chirps. Their echolocation chirps are a little bit different in shape. So the big brown bat is kind of like a long, low swoosh, and the eastern red bat, swoosh is a very scientific term, by the way. The eastern red bat has a kind of a steeper swoosh. So that's showing the difference between them. And so Charlie, what he does is he has a handheld little bat detector that you can hold in your hand as the bats are swooping overhead doing their little echolocation chirps. It makes like crackling noises, so you can hear it like coming through the machine. And there's a way that you can record the calls. So he'll even put it out in a location for a week, strap it to a tree, leave it there, and when a week is up, he goes and collects it and then puts the little card into the computer, and this program spits out these images, and it suggests which bat species is there. Sometimes we get, you know, these kind of weird chirp calls that might come up as something very odd, like a bat that doesn't occur in Rhode Island because the chirp was either distorted in some way or didn't get picked up properly by the recorder. So sometimes you get like, that's probably not the case that this bat was here. But it's a really cool way to see who's flying around. This is a way that they do detection for northern long-eared bats because they're a protected species. Anytime someone's going to do like if we do any like cuts, like forestry cuts on our management areas, before we do that cut, if it's going to happen, you know, during a season where we'd have bats fluttering around, they do a survey. They'll do a survey this way to listen for the northern long-eared bats. Ooh, I think we have some questions in the chat. I'm seeing it.
And these two bats that are on here, I actually borrowed the bat detector from Charlie and I put it out in my yard because I just moved into a new place, and I said, there are bats flying all around. I can't tell what kind they are, but they're flying all around my house. So I put the bat detector out and it came back, and I had these two bats. I had big brown bats and I had eastern red bats. And I also, I think, had some little brown bats. But when the data came back, it said I had like northern long-eared bats, and it was like one call. So it wasn't actually the northern long-eared bat. It was just a distorted call, and the technology actually can pick it out and say it probably wasn't that. It probably wasn't. But I was like, let it be a long-eared bat.
It'd be so cool, right?
Yeah.
So I am just gonna pull up. So I had to swap my screens here again because I had to open up a different thing, because we have one more quick little slide, and then we'll have some time for questions, and because it is 8 o'clock and I don't want to keep everybody all night here. We could talk about bats like forever, me and Gabby. We don't want to keep you guys too late. Okay, so let's share our screen here. Share that. That should open back up. Okay, perfect. Sorry for that little glitch, everybody. So some ways that we all can help bats in our own everyday lives, you know, because not all of us have bat detectors or going out with our mist nets and our rabies shots to be able to handle the bats. But there's some really easy ways that everybody can help bats. So we have, you know, the easiest way is putting up a bat box. So you can either buy these, you know, pre-made. This one looks like it was purchased from some sort of a company, like a naturalist type company, or you can make your own. And we have, there's plenty of guides online as well. The one thing that we stress when you're making your own bat box, and there's different sizes and shapes, some guides will tell you to put mesh, like either a mesh like screen on the back of the bat box and the inside for the bats to cling to. Charlie, our bat biologist, always recommends to not do this because the bats can actually get tangled in it if it's not secured down properly, or if, like, you know, if it wears away over time, it starts to rip, they can get tangled, and it can be a little dangerous for them. So think about, you know, bats have those cute little toes, those nice little claws. They can cling to the side of a cave. They can certainly cling to the inside of a bat box that's nice wood. So there's lots of different ways that you can make them. So no mesh And if you're going to put it up in your garden or on a tree, it should be about 15 feet off the ground. A sunny location is really nice too, because bats like to be nice and toasty in their house. Putting it near a garden is great if you want free pest control for your garden. Even just planting a garden, right? Planting an area that would invite insects in and provide habitat for insects is going to help bats, because you're creating a nice little buffet for them by providing habitat for their food source. So that's something we think about. Wait, how can I help the bats? Like, I can't like feed bats like I can put out a bird feeder, but you can make your yard or your neighborhood or your community into a bat habitat by providing really, really good, you know, some nice native wildflowers or some native shrubs. We always stress native wild plants because those are host plants for a lot of different insects. And so when we start with good native plants, then we have good healthy habitat, and then you can build up from there. On that line though, with insects, we discourage people from using pesticides of any kind. So pesticides like in your lawn, pesticides, you know, just in your garden by spraying bugs. The reason why is that because bats do that naturally, right? So they're going to be eating those pests in your garden, whatever beetle is eating your prized lilies. I remember one year my mom had these little red beetles, and I can't remember what they were called for the life of me. They were like chewing holes through her lilies. So bats will eat those because they're flying insects. So by avoiding putting down those pesticides to kill those pesky insects, it's really a detriment to bats, because you're killing off their food source. And also, if those bugs don't die right away and they've ingested the pesticide or they've been sprayed with the pesticide, that could potentially be transferred to the bat. So there's instances in nature where if there's some sort of chemical or poison in the environment, one animal eats it and then the predator eats that other animal, it can work its way up the food chain. So we see this with like rat poison. You know, if a rat eats rat poison, owl eats the rat, the owl can be poisoned. You know, same thing if you've heard of DDT with the bald eagles, moved from runoff from crops into the water, into the fish, into the bald eagles, which made their eggshells too thin. And then when they sat on the eggshells to incubate them, they crushed the eggs. So chemicals in the environment can have an unintended consequence. So we always say, you know, if you can avoid them, please do, and our wildlife will thank you. So that's all we have for everybody tonight. On bats. We could certainly keep talking. If folks have more questions, we're happy to answer them. But we encourage everybody, if you're on social media, you can follow us on Instagram, you can follow us on Facebook. You can also join our monthly email list, which I think folks, a lot of folks signed up for our monthly email list in the registration form. So you'll be in the know about more events like this coming up. We're really hoping that we can start doing some in-person events soon, because we really miss seeing everybody's faces and doing these really fun outdoor programs with everyone. But we thank you all so much for coming and for being a part of this and for learning about bats with us and sharing your enthusiasm for bats. It's always really nice to hear that people like bats.
So someone had asked how to join the Bat Watch. So we did not do a bat night this year just because it was right in the midst of when COVID was really bad. But I posted a link in the chat to the wildlife outreach page. So any of our programs or upcoming events will be posted there. So as soon as we know that we can safely have programs again, you can look on that page and you'll see it pop up there. You can also, like Mary said, follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and we'll post all our events up there, upcoming events also. Hopefully it'll happen soon. We just have to kind of wait it out a little while, but hopefully by next summer, hopefully we can have a bat night again, because we were really excited about bat night this year, and a lot of, you know, like everyone, a lot of things had to get canceled and pushed off till a later date.
We just roll with it. So we're so thrilled that people are like, I'll come to a virtual bat night. You know, it's like, and not get to do all, we usually do trivia in person. We have some fun show and tell stuff. It's, you know, it's very different now, but we're happy that we can still still do this in some capacity. We had a whole like series of bird walks planned for this summer. Gabby and I did a lot of like planning over the winter. We were so bummed. Like, but it's okay. They're just going to be bigger and better when we can all.
And this recording will be posted on our YouTube channel too. So we'll also, I'm sure, send an email with the link as well, so that if you forgot everything that we said, I forgot what I said. So if you forgot, it's okay. You can watch the YouTube recording, and then you can also share that with your friends if they missed it, they forgot, if they're interested in learning about bats in Rhode Island.
Yeah. Also, check out our other goofy YouTube videos, because we've had a lot of fun in this pandemic coming up with some fun outreach videos where you can go on a virtual field trip with Gabby and me and check out some snakes and other critters. So we hope you'll enjoy it. So with that, we'll say goodnight and thank you everybody so much for coming. Take care and happy Halloween.
Bye.
I'm gonna stop recording. I always forget to stop recording.